Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News. And if you are tuning into this channel, you are probably smarter than the average bear. I want to cover a couple things today. More Hurricane Dorian news. Survivors take stock as death toll rises in the Bahamas. So basically, they're not giving real numbers about what the casualties are or the death toll is. Reasons for doing this, I don't know. Welcome to the time of great miseducation or I don't know, great propaganda in the news. We're going to see, more climate change related weather things, not reported fully. We're going to have, partial news or no news at all. And I think part of the reason why they don't want to actually state the real death toll or tell people how bad it is obviously that would raise the alarm about, how bad these storms are becoming and how bad climate change is actually affecting us. It's happening on all fronts and all kinds of levels. But let me just read a little bit of this. I don't think the world knows how many people died, Valesha Johnson said after escaping the Dorian-ravaged Abaco Island and catching an evacuation flight to Nassau. After what she lived through, the 23-year-old is confused. And others here in the Bahamas echo the same. Why is the Bahamian government not releasing casualty numbers that reflect the reality of what she and others have seen? The official death toll so far stands at 44, according to the Bahamian authorities, most of them on the Abaco Islands. No way, Johnson said. Absolutely no way. This is just like 9/11 for us. We're scarred. 2 neighbors dead in their yards was the first sight Valesha Johnson remembers seeing. That was after finally emerging from the Abaco Islands house she grew up in and sheltered in while Hurricane Dorian raged. When Johnson next went to check on a family who lived nearby, she knew had chosen to stay home to ride out the Category 5 hurricane. Their property was in ruins and there was no sign of life. Through the rubble, we saw that they were there. You were walking over bodies. You're seeing trucks, flatbed trucks loaded with bodies. It's 1 week out and cleanup and recovery logistics are fluid. Fluid, I love that word. Whenever the word fluid is used in a news story, that means nobody knows and they're probably bullshitting you. So as soon as you hear that word, red flag. Hospitals are overwhelmed and help still can't reach for some of the hardest hit areas. Rescue teams are still trying to reach some Bahamian communities isolated by floodwaters and debris. So the rescue efforts still continue to go on, but this is alarming that they're not giving us real death tolls or real estimation of the death tolls. Of course, they have to play down the actual seriousness of the situation. And, this is just an ongoing, we're going to see more and more of this, I think, as climate change worsens, as extreme weather worsens, as the situation worsens. We're going to get less real information, less real reporting, less of everything. It's going to become harder and harder to get a real idea of what's going on. And this is all by design, of course, because and this is why it's very, very helpful that Trump is in office. All of his actions and all of his administrations can, go towards minimizing the danger in the eyes of, the common guy. Anyways, moving on to this article that was almost everywhere yesterday. I saw this article in probably 10 different places and probably 5 different people linked this article to me. Thank you all for sending me this article. Obviously, this struck a chord with many. This is from the New Yorker, and it is titled, "What If We Stopped Pretending the Climate Apocalypse is Coming? To prepare for it, we need to admit that we can't prevent it." This is from September 8th, or yesterday, 2019, by Jonathan Franzen. "There is infinite hope," Kafka tells us, "only not for us." This is a fittingly mystical epigram from a writer whose characters strive for ostensibly reachable goals and tragically or amusingly never manage to get any closer to them. But it seems to me in our rapidly darkening world that the converse of Kafka's quip is equally true. There is no hope except for us. I'm talking, of course, about climate change. The struggle to rein in global carbon emissions and keep the planet from melting down has the feel of Kafka's fiction. The goal has been clear for 30 years, and despite earnest efforts, we've made essentially no progress toward reaching it. Today, the scientific evidence verges on irrefutable. If you're younger than 60, you have a good chance of witnessing the radical destabilization of life on Earth, massive crop failures, apocalyptic fires, imploding economies, epic flooding, hundreds of millions of refugees fleeing, regions made uninhabitable by extreme heat or permanent drought. If you're under 30, you're all but guaranteed to witness it. If you care about the planet and about the people and animals who live on it, there are two ways to think about this. You can keep on hoping the catastrophe is preventable and feel ever more frustrated or enraged by the world's inaction, or you can accept that disaster is coming and begin to rethink what it means to have hope. Even at this late date, expressions of unrealistic hope continue to abound. Hardly a day seems to pass without my reading that it's time to roll up your sleeves and save the planet, that the problem of climate change can be solved if we summon the collective will. Although this message was probably still true in 1988 when the science became fully clear, we've emitted as much atmospheric carbon in the past 30 years as we did in the previous 2 centuries of industrialization. I was trying to say that yesterday in yesterday's broadcast, and not very well, but so that's what's happened. In the last 30 years, we've emitted as much carbon as we have since the beginning of industrialization. The facts have changed, but somehow the message stays the same. Psychologically, this denial makes sense. Despite the outrageous fact that I'll soon be dead forever, I live in the present, not the future. Given a choice between an alarming abstraction, death, and the reassuring evidence of my senses, breakfast, my mind prefers to focus on the latter. The planet, too, is still marvelously intact, still basically normal, seasons changing, another election year coming, new comedies on Netflix, and its impending collapse is even harder to wrap my mind around than death. I'm going to stop right here and say it's interesting because I see, the Doom crowd and the NTHE crowd are all like, golly, I thought we'd all be dead by now. Or, I for sure thought the end of the world would already come, and much to our dismay or whatever. And I don't see how you can actually think that when so many, everything is pretty normal, until you see actual radical signs of impending collapse, however that might look. You're not going to see like mayhem or, apocalyptic running amok. It's just, I don't think we're going to see that anyways. I don't think the collapse is going to look like most people think or want it to look, like everything just goes poof and everybody goes, and runs around and, machetes each other to death. And there's a few survivors. Like, that's not how it's going to look. How it's going to look is that, things are going to slowly break down little by little. Or you're going to have, extreme weather events continue to ravage certain areas, but everywhere else is going to be like, I don't know, we're fine. Or we just rebuilt from last year's storm, or et cetera, et cetera. We're probably not going to see, the full-on implosion that collapse might be, unless we get some kind of massive economic collapse or massive food shortages. And, I just don't see it happening all at once. I see it bumping along down an ever steepening staircase, probably for another 5 years or 10 years. I could be wrong. All predictions are on the table, and all possibilities are out there. Other kinds of apocalypse, whether religious or thermonuclear or asteroidal, at least have the binary neatness of dying. One moment the world is there, the next moment it's gone forever. Climate apocalypse, by contrast, is messy. It will take the form of increasingly severe crisis, compounding chaotically until civilization begins to fray. Things will get very bad, but maybe not too soon. Maybe not for everyone. Maybe not for me. Some of the denial, however, is more willful. The evil of the Republican Party's position on climate science is well known, but denial is entrenched in progressive politics too, or at least in its rhetoric. And let me just go back and finish by saying the Bahamas are utterly know what climate collapse feels like right now. That's climate collapse in your neighborhood. But for everyone else, we're still, whatever, taking plane trips. The Green New Deal, the blueprint for some of the most substantial proposals put forth on the issue, is still framed as our last chance to avert catastrophe and save the planet. By way of gargantuan renewable energy projects, many of the groups that support these proposals deploy the language of stopping climate change or imply that there's still time to prevent it. Unlike the political right, the left prides itself on listening to climate scientists who do indeed allow that catastrophe is theoretically avertible, but not everyone seems to be listening carefully. The stress falls on the word theoretically. So again, we have three realities. We have the utter denial of the right. We have the left's, the mainstream left's embrace of climate science or climate change as a reality, and like, oh God, guys, we only have a little bit of time. And then you have the people who are deep into the knowledge of climate change and climate science, and they're like, gosh, we should do something, but what at this late hour could we possibly do? Our atmosphere and oceans can absorb only so much heat before climate change, intensified by various feedback loops, spins completely out of control. The consensus among scientists and policymakers is that we'll pass this point of no return if the global mean temperature rises by more than 2 degrees. By more than 2 degrees Celsius, maybe a little more, but also maybe a little less. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tells us that to limit the rise to less than 2 degrees, we not only need to reverse the trend of the past 3 decades, we need to approach zero net emissions globally in the next 3 decades. This is, to say the least, a tall order. It also assumes that you trust the IPCC's calculations. New research described last month in Scientific American demonstrates that climate scientists, far from exaggerating the threat of climate change, have underestimated its pace and severity. To project the rise in the global mean temperature, scientists rely on complicated atmospheric modeling. They take a host of variables and run them through supercomputers to generate, say, tens of thousands of different simulations, or 10,000 different simulations for the coming century in order to make a best prediction in the rise of temperature. When a scientist predicts a rise of 2 degrees Celsius, she's merely naming a number about which she's very confident the rise will be at least 2 degrees Celsius. The rise might, in fact, be far higher. As a non-scientist, I do my own kind of modeling. I run various future scenarios through my brain, apply the constraints of human psychology and political reality, take note of the relentless rise in global energy consumption. Thus far, the carbon savings provided by renewable energy have been more than offset by consumer demand, and count the scenarios in which collective action averts catastrophe. The scenarios which I draw from the prescriptions of policymakers and activists share certain necessary conditions. The first condition is that every one of the world's major polluting countries institute draconian conservation measures, shut down much of its energy and transportation infrastructure, and completely retool its economy. According to a recent paper in Nature, the carbon emissions from existing global infrastructure, if operated through its normal lifetime, will exceed our entire emissions allowance. The further gigatons of carbon that can be released without crossing the threshold of catastrophe. This estimate does not include the thousands of new energy and transportation projects already planned or under construction. And that always gets my ire when I'm, traveling around or, just driving around the city and I just see construction. And, Nobody's planning on stopping anytime too soon. Construction is what we all need in our lives for a better economy. To stay within that allowance, a top-down intervention needs to happen not only in every country, but throughout every country. Making New York City a green utopia will not avail if Texans keep pumping oil and driving pickup trucks. Yeah, anyways. I've got something really terrible to say about, normal dude guys who drive pickup trucks, but I won't even say it, whatever. But what is your purpose on the planet, Mr. Dude Guy driving a pickup truck? Just wanted to get more stuff. The actions taken by these countries might also be the right ones. Vast sums of government money must be spent without wasting it and without lining the wrong pockets. Here, it's useful to recall the Kafkaesque joke of the European Union's biofuel mandate, which served to accelerate the deforestation of Indonesia for palm oil plantations, and the American subsidy of ethanol fuel, which turned out to benefit no one but corn farmers. Finally, overwhelming numbers of human beings, including millions of government-hating Americans, need to accept high taxes and severe curtailment of their familiar lifestyles without revolting. They must accept the reality of climate change and have faith in the extreme measures taken to combat it. They can't dismiss news they dislike as fake. They have to set aside nationalism and class and racial resentments. They have to make sacrifices for distant, threatened nations and distant future generations. And golly, what a tall order that is, to convince everybody that, they just can't have all their stuff, or they must live in a way that might seem severely uncomfortable or just not as fun. Gosh, we just want to have fun and just buy things and just, live our lives. Even the doomers who are like, just enjoy on some level are like, are useful tools of industrial society, because they're just like, just live it up a little, man. Just like everybody else. They have to make sacrifices for distant threatened nations and distant future generations. They have to be permanently terrified by hotter summers and more frequent natural disasters rather than just getting used to them. Every day, instead of thinking about breakfast, they have to think about death. Call me a pessimist or call me a humanist, but I don't see human nature fundamentally changing anytime soon. I can run 10,000 scenarios through my model, and not one of them do I see the 2-degree target being met. Newsflash, I don't either. To judge from recent opinion polls, which show that a majority of Americans, many of them Republican, are pessimistic about the planet's future, from the success of a book like David Wallace Wells' Harrowing the Uninhabitable Earth, which was released this year, I'm not alone in having reached this conclusion. But there continues to be a reluctance to broadcast it, or broadcast actual news, because you don't want to scare the children, and by children I mean adults. Some climate activists argue that if we publicly admit that the problem can't be solved, it will discourage people from taking any ameliorative action at all. This seems to me not only a patronizing calculation, but an ineffectual one, given how little progress we have to show for it to date. The activists who make it remind me of the religious leaders who fear that without the promise of eternal salvation, people won't bother to behave well. In my experience, non-believers are no less loving of their neighbors than believers. And so I wonder what might happen if, instead of denying reality, we told ourselves the truth. First of all, even if we can no longer hope to be saved from 2 degrees of warming, there's still a strong political, practical, and ethical case for reducing carbon emissions. In the long run, it probably makes no difference how badly we overshoot 2 degrees once the point of no return is passed. The world will become self-transforming. In the shorter term, however, half measures are better than no measures. Halfway cutting our emissions would make the immediate effects of warming somewhat less severe, and it would somewhat postpone the point of no return, unless you believe that global dimming is a really, really bad and real situation, in which case it might actually increase the warming. Who knows? And would somewhat postpone the point of no return. The most terrifying thing about climate change is the speed at which it's advancing, the almost monthly shattering of temperature records. If collective action resulted in just one fewer devastating hurricane, just a few extra years of relative stability, it would be a goal worth pursuing. And I totally agree with that. In fact, it would be worth pursuing even if it had no effect at all. To fail to conserve a finite resource when conservation measures are available, to needlessly add carbon to the atmosphere when we know very well what carbon is doing to it, is simply wrong. Ding. Although the actions of one individual have zero effect on the climate, this doesn't mean that they're meaningless. Each one of us has an ethical choice to make. During the Protestant Reformation, when end times was merely an idea, not the horribly concrete thing it is today, a key doctrinal question was whether you should perform good works because it will get you into heaven, or whether you should perform them simply because they're good. Because while heaven is a question mark, you know that this world would be better if everyone performed them. I can respect the planet and care about the people with whom I share it without believing that it will save me. More than that, a false hope of salvation can be actively harmful. If you persist in believing that catastrophe can be averted, you commit yourself to tackling a problem so immense that it needs to be everyone's overriding priority forever. One result, weirdly, is a kind of complacency. By voting for green candidates, riding a bicycle to work, avoiding air travel, you might feel that you've done everything you can for the only thing worth doing. Whereas if you accept the reality that the planet will soon overheat to the point of threatening civilization, there's a whole lot more you should be doing. Our resources aren't infinite, even if we invest much of them in a longest shot gamble, reducing carbon emissions in the hope that it will save us. It's unwise to invest all of them. Every $1 billion, I'm a little confused by this endpoint, but anyways, reading on, I shall. Every $1 billion spent on high-speed trains, which may or may not be suitable for North America, is $1 billion not banked for disaster preparedness, reparations to inundated countries, or future humanitarian relief. Every renewable energy megaproject that destroys a living ecosystem, the green energy development now occurring in Kenya's national parks, the giant hydroelectric projects in Brazil, the construction of solar farms in open spaces, rather than in settled areas, erodes the resilience of a natural world already fighting for its life. Soil and water depletion, overuse of pesticides, the devastation of world fisheries. Collective will is needed for these problems too. And unlike the problem of carbon, they're within our power to solve. As a bonus, many low-tech conservation actions, restoring forests, preserving grasslands, eating less meat, can reduce our carbon footprint as effectively as massive industrial changes. All that war on climate change made sense only as long as it was winnable. Once you accept that we've lost it, other kinds of action take on greater meaning. Preparing for fires and floods and refugees is a direct, pertinent example. But the impending catastrophe heightens the urgency of almost any world-improving action. In times of increasing chaos, people seek protection in tribalism and armed force, rather than in the rule of law, and our best defense against this kind of dystopia is to maintain functioning democracies, functioning legal systems, functioning communities. In this respect, any movement towards a more just and civil society can now be considered a meaningful climate action. Securing fair elections is a climate action. Combating extreme wealth inequality is a climate action. Shutting down the hate machines on social media is a climate action. Instituting humane immigration policy, advocating for racial and gender equality, promoting respect for laws and their enforcement, supporting a free and independent press, ridding the country of assault weapons. These are all meaningful climate actions. To survive rising temperatures, every system, whether of the natural world or the human world, will need to be as strong and healthy as we can make it. And then there's the matter of hope. If your hope for the future depends on a wildly optimistic scenario, then you will do 10 years from now. What will you do 10 years from now when the scenario becomes unworkable, even in theory? Give up on a planet entirely? To borrow from the advice of financial planners, I might suggest a more balanced portfolio of hopes, some of them longer term, most of them shorter. It's fine to struggle against the constraints of human nature, hoping to mitigate the worst of what's to come, but it's just as important to fight smaller, more local battles that you have some realistic hope of winning. Keep doing the right thing for the planet, yes, but also keep trying to save what you love specifically. a community, an institution, a wild place, a species that's in trouble, and take heart in your small successes. Any good thing you can do now is arguably a hedge against the hotter future. But the really meaningful thing is that it's good today. As long as you have something to love, you have something to hope for. In Santa Cruz, where I live, there's an organization called the Homeless Garden Project. On a small working farm on the west end of town, it offers employment, training, support, and a sense of community to members of the city's homeless population. It can't solve the problem of homelessness, but it's been changing lives one at a time for nearly 30 years. Supporting itself in part by selling organic produce, it contributes more broadly to a revolution in how we think. I'm laughing about the helicopter flying over me right now. Supporting itself in part by selling organic produce, it contributes more broadly to a revolution in how we think about people in need, the land we depend on, and the natural world around us. In the summer, as a member of CSA program, I enjoy its kale and strawberries, and in the fall, because the soil is alive and uncontaminated, small migratory birds find sustenance in its furrows. There may come a time sooner than any of us like to think when the systems of industrial agriculture and global trade break down and homeless people outnumber people with homes. At that point, traditional local farming and strong communities will no longer just be liberal buzzwords. Kindness to neighbors and respect for the land, nurturing healthy soil, wisely managing water, caring for pollinators will be essential in a crisis and in whatever society survives it. A project like the Homeless Garden offers me the hope that the future, while undoubtedly worse than the present, might also in some ways be better. Most of all, though, it gives me hope for today. That was a very long article, and this video got to be very lengthy. Didn't plan for it to do that, but I hope you enjoyed that article as I did. I don't know if I really enjoyed the end. The end actually sounded pretty optimistic and maybe not at all, not totally tethered to reality. Maybe it is. I don't know. At the end of the day, I think that the important thing is the conversation. In the spectrum of what do we do about climate change, or how do we feel about climate change, or what do we think about climate change, there's a whole spectrum of thought and ideas on this. There's, we're all doomed, let it go, prepare for the worst. There's, batten down the hatches. There's, deep adaptation. There's, we've got 11 years to save ourselves or turn back the clock or mitigate. I think the reality of how bad the situation is important to realize and important to communicate to other people so that people might make educated choices based on real information. I think that the bottom line is that we absolutely have to have the most factual information at hand and the most factual scenarios at hand so that we can make wise decisions about what it is that we're going to do in the face of this, what it is that we possibly could do. It's going to be a combination of many things, just like this conversation about climate change is going to be a combination of many things. There's going to be a lot of disagreement. There's going to be a lot of, finger pointing and no, you're wrong. You're totally out of control and stupid for thinking that. But I think it's the worst thing we could do is shut down the conversation. So as long as we're having the conversation, as long as we're open to other points of view, and open to finding out what reality and truth is as much as possible, I think that's the best that we can do. Also, I'd like to just add at the end of this video, my views are being squashed. My subscriber numbers are being suppressed. I've heard from some other channels that in the last few weeks that they've experienced a lot of suppression on their channel as far as like views and subscriptions and, whatever basic activity is down overall across certain types of channels, certain channels trying to tell the truth. It has been happening to this channel as well. There, probably a month ago, I was getting a record number of subscribers and a record number of views every single day. I was doing about, close to 2,000 views a day. And now all my views are down. It's down to almost 1,000 kind of, and then I'll get a few hundred more in the next few days. It's taken me a really long time to get my last 100 subscribers. you know, or even every time I reach the next 100 around, you know, 80 or 85, everything stops. My subscriber total stops for about a week or two, and then they go, okay, we'll let you go over the next 100. So, you know, just keep sharing these videos if you like, and if you like them, and if you get unsubscribed, remember to resubscribe to the channel. I don't know what else to really do about this. I'm just voicing what's happening or what I'm seeing happening. They're also demonetizing a lot of my videos. Like, they'll demonetize it as soon as I upload it, and then like a day or two later, they're like, oh, it's fine, sorry. But, you know, while it was demonetized, we squashed your views and we squashed your income and we squashed, you know, everything. Sorry about that. So yeah, thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.